Maya walked down the street, keeping her eyes on the sidewalk. The small device on her wrist beeped softly every few seconds. She knew better than to remove it or turn it off. Everyone wore one now, the guidance band. The government said it was for safety, for a better society. But Maya knew the truth. It was control. 3 years ago, everything changed. The Unity Party took over the government after promising to end crime, poverty, and social problems. They introduced the guidance system, a network of smart devices that would guide people to make better choices. At first, many people welcomed it. It's just gentle nudges in the right direction. The Unity Party leader, Director Chun, had explained on national television with his perfect smile. The system will help you live your best life. The guidance bands tracked everything: where you went, who you talked to, what you bought, even how fast your heart was beating. The system gave each person a score based on their behavior. High scores meant rewards, better jobs, housing, and services. Low scores meant punishment, restrictions, public shaming, or worse. Maya's score had been dropping lately. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she'd been meeting with her friend Eli, who the system had flagged as socially disruptive. Or maybe because she'd been reading books that weren't on the approved list. Either way, her band now vibrated whenever she did something the system didn't like. As Maya passed the central plaza, the giant screens showed Director Chen's face. His voice boomed across the square. Citizens, we celebrate 3 years of peace and prosperity under the guidance system. Crime is down 85%. Productivity is up 60%. Happiness ratings have never been higher. Maya noticed how no one looked up at the screens anymore. People just hurried past with their heads down like her. She remembered when the plaza used to be full of street musicians, artists, and people talking and laughing. Now it was silent except for Director Chen's voice and the soft beeping of thousands of guidance bands. Maya reached the coffee shop where she worked. Her boss, Mrs. Lin, greeted her with a tight smile. "Your score dropped again," Mrs. Lin whispered. "The system notified me this morning." "I'm sorry, Maya, but if it goes any lower, I can't keep you working here. The shop will be penalized." Maya nodded. She understood. Everyone had to protect their own scores. As she put on her apron, Maya's band vibrated. A message appeared on its small screen. Reminder: approved conversation topics for today: the Unity celebration, system benefits, weather. Maya sighed as she began making coffee for customers who rarely spoke anymore. Eli was waiting for Maya after her shift ended. His curly hair was hidden under a cap, and he wore a loose jacket that covered most of his guidance band. They walked together toward the old library building, one of the few places with minimal surveillance. "Did you hear what happened in District 7? Eli asked quietly. Maya shook her head. A whole neighborhood refused to update their bands. The system tried to lock them out of their homes, but someone figured out how to override it. They're calling themselves the Free District now. Maya's eyes widened. Is it true? Or just a rumor? Rumors spread despite the system's attempts to control information. Stories about resistance, about people finding ways around the bans, about places where the system couldn't reach. It's true, Eli said. My cousin lives there. And there's more. People are finding ways to trick the bans. Someone created a device that can mimic approved behavior patterns while you do whatever you want. Maya's band vibrated sharply. A warning message flashed. Conversation topic not approved. Score deduction. Eli noticed and lowered his voice even more. Meet me at the library tomorrow. There's something I need to show you. As they parted ways, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe the system wasn't as perfect as Director Chen claimed. The next day, Maya made her way to the library after work. Few people visited anymore, since most books had been digitized and filtered through the system. The library was kept open mainly for elderly citizens who hadn't fully adapted to digital reading. Eli was in the history section, pretending to read an old textbook. When Maya approached, he carefully slid a small paper note into her hand, actual paper, which had become rare since the system monitored all digital communications. The note had an address and a time. 42, Willow Street, basement, 10 p.m. That night, Maya stood outside an old apartment building on Willow Street. Her heart raced as she checked for surveillance drones. Her band vibrated continuously now, warning her that she was in an unapproved location during rest hours. Maya found the basement entrance and knocked on the door in the pattern Eli had shown her. 2 quick knocks, pause. 3 slow knocks. The door opened, and Maya gasped. The basement was full of people, at least 30 of them. Some wore their bands loosely covered with fabric. Others had clearly modified theirs. On a large table were tools, circuit boards, and what looked like disassembled guidance bands. "Welcome to the disconnect," Eli said with a smile. "You're not alone, Maya." An older woman stepped forward. Her gray hair was tied back in a braid, and she wore no band at all. "I'm Dr. Varma. I helped design the original guidance system before I understood what they planned to do with it." Maya stared at the woman's bare wrist. How do you live without a band?" "Not easily," Dr. Varma admitted. "I can't shop at system stores or take public transportation. But we've built a network, people who remember what freedom felt like and are willing to help each other." Dr. Varma showed Maya around the room. Some people were teaching others how to modify their bands to report false data. Others were planning supply routes to neighborhoods that had been cut off from resources after resistance activities. "The system isn't perfect," Dr. Varma explained. "It relies on people believing they can't fight back. But it has weaknesses. The main one is that it can't actually control what we think, only what we do. And thoughts lead to actions they can't predict." For the first time in years, Maya felt something larger than hope. She felt purpose. Over the next few months, Maya became part of the Disconnect Network. She learned how to modify her band to show approved activities while she attended secret meetings. She carried messages between resistance groups. Most importantly, she learned to recognize others who felt as she did. People who smiled with their eyes, but not their mouths. People who used old slang words the system didn't track. People who hesitated slightly before responding to system messages. The resistance was larger than she had imagined. There were groups in every district, each finding different ways to fight back. In the Eastern District, artists created murals that looked ordinary to surveillance cameras, but contained hidden messages visible only from certain angles. In the Northern District, programmers worked on viruses that could temporarily disable the central system. In Maya's district, they focused on creating blind spots, places where surveillance was blocked or redirected. Maya's apartment became a message hub. Her band now showed her as a model citizen who went to work, exercised at the approved fitness center, and watched system programming each night. In reality, she held meetings in her living room while a special device projected false data to the surveillance network. One evening, as resistance members gathered in her apartment, someone brought news that made everyone fall silent. "They've started taking children," said a thin man named Jackson. "Children who score too low on conformity metrics are being sent to special educational centers. My neighbor's daughter was taken yesterday. She was only 10 years old." The room erupted in angry whispers. This was a new level of control, even for the Unity Party. "We can't wait any longer," Dr. Varma said. "We need to move forward with Operation Blackout." Operation Blackout was the Resistance's most ambitious plan, a coordinated shutdown of the entire guidance system for 24 hours, long enough to show people the system could be beaten, to distribute truth about the Unity Party, and to free those who had been detained for low scores. "It's risky," Eli warned. "If it fails, they'll crack down harder. And if we do nothing, we'll lose a generation of children to their indoctrination," Dr. Varma replied. "We have to try." Maya felt fear twist in her stomach, but she nodded in agreement. "When?" "Unity Day," Dr. Varma said. "When Director Chin gives his annual speech. In 2 weeks." As the day approached, Maya could feel tension in the air. Even people who weren't part of the resistance seemed on edge. The system responded by increasing calmness reminders and happiness prompts on everyone's bands. Maya's band now buzzed constantly with messages. "Smile. Studies show smiling improves your score. Remember, reporting unusual behavior is your duty. Unity Day approaches. Show your dedication." The night before Unity Day, Maya couldn't sleep. What if Operation Blackout failed? What if they were all arrested? What if it worked, but people were too afraid to embrace freedom? As dawn broke, Maya prepared for her role. She would be one of hundreds positioned near critical system infrastructure, ready to activate EMP devices that would temporarily disable the local networks. Others would hack into communication systems to broadcast the truth. Some would open the detention centers, where low-scoring citizens were held. Maya tucked the small EMP device into her jacket pocket and headed toward her assigned location, a relay station disguised as a utility building near the central plaza. The plaza was already filling with people for Director Chen's speech. Unity guards checked everyone's bands at the entrances, making sure only citizens with acceptable scores were allowed close to the stage. Maya's modified band passed the check, and she entered the crowd, slowly making her way toward the utility building. Her heart pounded so loudly, she was sure the people around her must hear it. The giant screens around the plaza lit up with the Unity symbol, a perfect circle containing a stylized hand and eye. Triumphant music played as Director Chen walked onto the stage, waving to the crowd with his characteristic perfect smile. Citizens, today we celebrate 4 years of unity, purpose, and progress. The crowd applauded on cue, their bands vibrating to remind them of proper response intensity. Maya reached the utility building and pretended to tie her shoe near its entrance. She checked her watch, a real watch, not connected to the system. 3 minutes until synchronized action. Director Chen continued his speech, his voice growing more passionate. Before the guidance system, we were lost. We made poor choices. We wasted our potential. Now we are guided toward perfection. 2 minutes. Some say our methods are extreme. I say, look at the results. No more crime. No more confusion. No more conflict. 1 minute. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the EMP device in her pocket. Around the plaza, she could see other resistance members in position. The woman selling Unity flags, the old man on the bench, the maintenance worker checking a streetlight. The future belongs to those who embrace guidance. Director Chen raised his arms dramatically. Together we will. 0. Maya activated her device. Across the city, hundreds of others did the same. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, one by one, the giant screens went dark. The speakers cut out mid-sentence. And most importantly, every guidance band in range went silent. People in the crowd looked at their wrists in confusion. Some tapped their bands, trying to make them work. Others simply stared, not knowing what to do without the system's constant directions. Maya watched as the confusion slowly turned to something else, awareness. People were looking up from their bands. They were looking at each other. Some were removing their bands entirely, holding them in their hands as if seeing them for the first time. On the stage, Director Chen was shouting into a dead microphone. Unity guards rushed around in panic, their communication systems down. Then, the backup plan activated. Instead of Director Chen's face, the screens around the plaza came back to life, showing footage the resistance had gathered. Secret detention centers, Unity Party officials discussing population control, unedited news reports from before the takeover. A voice boomed from the speakers, Dr. Varma's voice. Citizens, you have been controlled, not guided. Today, we give you back your choice. The guidance system will be offline for 24 hours. Use this time to remember who you were, who you can be again. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some people stood frozen in shock. Others began to shout, some in anger, some in celebration. Arguments broke out. Questions were asked aloud instead of typed into bands. Maya saw Unity guards moving toward the utility building. It was time for her to disappear. She slipped into the crowd, making her way toward the exit and her next assignment, helping to distribute paper maps showing safe locations where people could go during the blackout. As she moved through the crowd, an elderly woman grabbed her arm. "Is it true?" the woman asked, her eyes wide. "Everything they just showed us?" Maya nodded. "Yes, but don't take my word for it. For the next 24 hours, you can look for yourself. Talk to people. Remember how." The woman's face changed, decades of obedience battling with a reawakening desire for truth. "I remember," she whispered. I remember before. All across the city, similar scenes were playing out. People removing their bands. People talking to strangers. People looking up at the sky instead of down at their screens. Of course, not everyone welcomed the blackout. Some citizens rushed home, afraid of a world without guidance. Others became angry, having built their lives around high system scores and the privileges they brought. Maya knew the Unity Party would fight back. They had contingency plans, backup systems. The blackout wouldn't last forever, but it didn't need to. It just needed to last long enough for people to remember. Night fell on a city in chaos, without the system telling them when to return home, when to eat, when to sleep. People made their own decisions. Some gathered in parks and squares, talking excitedly. Others helped break into detention centers, freeing those who had been held for low scores. Unity forces tried to maintain control in some districts, but they were overwhelmed by the numbers and the sudden unpredictability of people acting on their own. Maya spent the night moving between safe houses, helping coordinate the resistance's next steps. Reports came in from across the city, most positive, some concerning. The Eastern District was fully free, with citizens organizing their own security. The Northern District faced heavy Unity resistance. The Western District was divided, with fierce debates happening in every neighborhood. As dawn approached, Maya finally returned to her apartment, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her band lay discarded on her kitchen table. She kept glancing at it, half expecting it to spring back to life. A knock at her door made her jump. She approached cautiously, then relaxed when she heard Eli's voice. "It's happening," he said as she let him in. His face was scratched, and his clothes were dirty, but his eyes shone with excitement. Not just here, everywhere. The blackout spread to other cities. The whole system is crashing because too many people are rejecting it at once. Maya sat down, overwhelmed. What about Director Chen? Gone. He tried to flee the city, but his own guards stopped him. Turns out, they didn't like being controlled either. As morning fully arrived, Maya and Eli made their way to Central Plaza. The scene was unrecognizable from the day before. The stage where Director Chen had stood was now occupied by ordinary citizens, taking turns speaking. Some called for the complete dismantling of the Unity Party. Others urged caution and gradual change. Everyone was being heard. Dr. Varma spotted them and waved them over. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, but she was smiling. "It worked better than we hoped," she said. "The system had a fatal flaw they never addressed. It required constant compliance. Once enough people stopped complying all at once, it couldn't adapt." "So it's over?" Maya asked. "Just like that." Dr. Varma shook her head. "Not over. Changed. There will be those who want the system back, people who benefited from it or who fear freedom. There will be power struggles. We'll need to rebuild institutions that were dismantled. It won't be easy." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of breaking glass came from a nearby building. A group of people were looting a Unity Party office, throwing documents into the street. "See," Dr. Varma sighed. "Freedom includes the freedom to make mistakes." Maya watched as another group of citizens approached the looters. Instead of fighting, they began talking. After a few minutes, the looting stopped, and both groups began working together to sort through the documents, preserving evidence of Unity Party crimes. But people can also choose to do better, Maya observed, when they're allowed to choose. Throughout the day, neighborhood councils formed spontaneously across the city. People with organizational skills, technical knowledge, or leadership experience stepped forward. Others volunteered for tasks like food distribution, medical care, and security. Maya found herself working alongside a former Unity guard named Tomas, who had removed his uniform and band. "I joined to protect people," he explained as they distributed water to a group of children. "Somewhere along the way, that changed. I was just enforcing rules I didn't understand." By evening, a temporary government had formed, representatives from each district meeting in the old city hall. They called themselves the Transition Council. Their first act was to broadcast a message to all districts. The Unity Party regime has fallen. All citizens have the right to remove their bans. No one will be punished for their score. Dr. Varma was invited to join the council. She declined. "I'll help as an advisor," she told Maya. "But the new world should be built by those who will live in it longest." 1 week after Operation Blackout, Maya stood on her apartment roof, watching the sunset. The city was different. Messier. Louder. More alive. Street musicians had returned to the plazas. Artists painted over Unity Party symbols. Children played outside without constant monitoring. Not everything was perfect. There had been some violence. Some communities struggled with basic services. Arguments broke out constantly about how to move forward. The Transition Council debated endlessly about everything from justice for Unity officials to what kind of system should replace the bans. Eli joined Maya on the roof, handing her a cup of tea. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing at the city below. "Was it worth it?" Maya thought about the chaos, the uncertainty, the difficult days ahead. But she also thought about the woman in the plaza remembering her life before control, the children released from educational centers, reuniting with parents, and the simple joy of having a conversation without approved topics. "Yes," she said, "freedom is messy, but it's real." In the months that followed, other cities followed their example. Networks of resistance shared techniques for disabling the system. People traveled to help others, carrying knowledge and hope from place to place. There were attempts to restore the old order. Some Unity officials formed militias. Some citizens, frightened by the disorder, demanded the return of the guidance system. But it was too late. People had remembered what freedom felt like. 1 year after Operation Blackout, Maya stood in Central Plaza again. The giant screens were gone. In their place was a simple monument, a pile of thousands of discarded guidance bands with a plaque that read, "Never forget what we gave away. Never again." The city had changed. They had built a new system, one based on transparent governance, community oversight, and most importantly, choice. The technology that had once controlled them now served them, providing information without judgment, connecting without monitoring. As Maya watched children playing freely in the plaza, she saw Dr. Varma walking slowly through the crowd, smiling at the scene. "They thought they could control us," Dr. Varma said when she reached Maya. "They forgot one thing." "What's that?" Maya asked. Dr. Varma pointed to her head, and then her heart. "These can't be programmed. And in the end, that's what makes us human." Maya nodded, touching the small scar on her wrist where her band had once been. Humanity proved them wrong.